He had everything until an accident shook his world, and the truth revealed who was there just for show. She took any job to support her daughter, but never imagined how her hands would change a life. Sometimes the body breaks so the soul can wake up. And when hope seemed lost, a child brought back the most unexpected miracle. Before you hear this touching story of resilience, love, and transformation, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Silence had become the new melody of that colossal mansion, which once echoed with laughter, toasts, and the incessant buzz of business deals closed in opulent rooms. Michael Sullivan, formerly the epicenter of all that frenzy, was now just a silent spectator of his own life. In his early 30s, he had built an empire, driven by insatiable ambition and a charisma that opened doors and hearts. Grandiose parties, private jets, yachts anchored in tropical paradises, all of this framed his existence, a vibrant canvas of success and excess, until the day the world turned upside down. The car accident, a brutal collision on a wet road, didn't take his life, but robbed him of the movement in his legs, imprisoning him in a wheelchair and, metaphorically, within the walls of his own home. The mansion, once a symbol of his freedom and power, transformed into a golden cage. Each room, each corridor, each step of the imposing staircase was a painful reminder of what he had lost. Frustration was a slow poison, corroding his soul, transforming the vibrant man into a bitter shadow. Victoria, his fiancée, a socialite of stunning beauty and calculating ambition, was a reflection of the life he led before. She moved through the house with the grace of a ballerina, but her steps became increasingly distant from his. The sparkle in her eyes, once directed at him, now seemed to focus only on maintaining appearances, on preserving a status that the accident threatened to destabilize. She loved him, she said, but her love seemed to have limits when confronted with the reality of dependence. "Michael, darling, you need someone to help you with the more intimate things," she had suggested, her voice soft, but with a hint of poorly disguised repulsion. "I don't have time, and frankly, it's not something I know how to do. I hired a caregiver. She arrives today." The decision was already made, and Michael, too exhausted to fight, merely nodded, feeling the weight of humiliation crushing him. The idea of having a stranger invading his privacy, witnessing his vulnerability, was almost as unbearable as the condition itself. That's how Sarah entered his life. A woman in her early 30s, with eyes that carried the depth of someone who had already faced many battles. Her brown hair, tied in a simple bun, and her modest clothes contrasted drastically with the luxury around her. She was a single mother, and the need to support her daughter, Emma, had led her to this arduous and desolate job. Bathing, applying ointments, changing bandages, tasks that most would avoid, but which she accepted with a silent dignity. She didn't have diplomas hanging on the wall, but her hands had a wisdom of their own, a touch that seemed to understand the fragility of the human body. The first days were a test of patience for both. Michael treated her with a cutting coldness, responding with monosyllables or most of the time with a heavy silence. He was irritated by her calmness, by the absence of judgment in her gaze, by the way she seemed to see beyond his anger, straight to the pain he tried to hide. He saw her as yet another reminder of his impotence, an intruder in his sanctuary of despair. Sarah, for her part, remained professional, her movements precise and efficient, her voice low and respectful. She wasn't intimidated by his temperament, nor by the oppressive environment. There was a resilience in her posture that Michael, despite his self-imposed blindness, couldn't help but notice. The routine was established, monotonous and predictable. The morning bath was the moment of greatest tension. Michael hated the exposure, the forced intimacy. Sarah, however, transformed the act into something almost ritualistic. Steam filled the bathroom. The soft aroma of the essential oils she used hung in the air, and the sound of running water was the only noise breaking the silence. She moved him with surprising gentleness, her hands firm but careful, washing each part of his body with a respect he received from no one else. On a particularly grey morning, as Sarah rinsed his legs, a deeper silence hung between them. Her touch was soft, almost imperceptible, but somehow different. Then her voice, low and hesitant, broke the quietness. "Do you feel that, Mr. Sullivan?" Michael opened his eyes, which until then had been closed in resignation. The question caught him by surprise. Feel what? The water. The touch. He felt only absence. Emptiness. "I don't feel anything, Sarah," he replied, his voice laden with contained anger, a warning for her not to feed false hopes. "I've told you there's nothing there. It's useless." Sarah didn't respond. She just continued her work, her eyes fixed on his legs, an expression of concentration on her face. Michael became even more irritated by her silent persistence. Finishing the bath, he was taken back to bed, his bad mood even more pronounced. Hours passed. The mansion was immersed in its usual silence. Michael was trying to read, but his mind wandered. Suddenly, something made him stop. A strange sensation, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. A slight tingling, like tiny needles traveling through his right cuff. He frowned, trying to concentrate. Was it his imagination? An involuntary spasm? He tried to move his toes, but nothing happened. Still, the tingling persisted. A faint vibration, a whisper of life where before there was only emptiness. For the first time in months, a crack of something different opened in his universe of darkness. He didn't know what it was, but he couldn't ignore it. Sarah's question echoed in his mind. "Do you feel that, Mr. Sullivan?" And to his own surprise, the answer, though minimal, seemed to be yes. The days that followed the slight tingling were a mix of hope and skepticism for Michael. He tried to ignore the sensation, attribute it to a whim of his mind, but it returned, faint, like a distant echo. Sarah, for her part, continued her routine with the same dedication, but now her touches seemed to have a new intention. She didn't mention the tingling again, but her eyes, always attentive, seemed to register every micro-expression on his face. She began using techniques that Michael had never seen doctors employ. Hot and cold compresses were applied to his legs, alternating relaxing heat with invigorating cold shock. Her movements during the improvised physical therapy sessions were softer, almost a caress, and she spoke, yes, she spoke. These weren't medical lectures or technical explanations, but words loaded with an almost mystical intention. "Your body is wise, Mr. Sullivan," she whispered, while massaging his atrophied muscles. "It knows the way back, it just needs to be reminded." Or at another time, while gently stretching his limbs, "Life finds a way, even in the tightest cracks." Michael at first listened with disdain, finding those phrases naive, almost foolish. But over time he realized that her words weren't meant to convince his logical mind, but to touch something deeper, something he had buried beneath layers of pain and frustration. Her phrases, few and spaced out, pierced like arrows, not to wound, but to open space within him, to air out the dusty corners of his soul. His fiancée, Victoria, continued to orbit in her own sphere of social commitments and appearances. She would occasionally enter the room, with a forced smile and empty questions about his well-being, before disappearing again, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and indifference. Sarah's presence, once a source of irritation, began to become a welcome counterpoint to the emptiness left by Victoria. There was an authenticity in Sarah, a presence that demanded nothing from him, only offered care. It was on a rainy morning with the sound of water hitting the mansion's windows that the dynamics of the house changed forever. Sarah was in the bathroom, helping Michael with his personal hygiene, when a soft noise coming from the bedroom caught both their attention. Michael frowned, irritated by the interruption. Sarah, with a sigh, realized what had happened. Emma, her daughter, must have entered secretly. The girl, no more than 7 years old, with lively and curious eyes and a somewhat awkward smile, appeared at the bathroom door. She wore a simple dress and had her hair tied in 2 loose braids. Her large eyes fixed on Michael, who was sitting in the bath chair with a towel wrapped around his waist. There was no fear, no pity, just a childish and disarmed curiosity. Sarah, mortified, hurried to scold her daughter. "Emma, what are you doing here? Go to the living room right now." But the girl, ignoring her mother, took a step forward, her eyes still fixed on Michael. He, in turn, felt a wave of discomfort. It had been a long time since he had been looked at with such innocence, without filters. Most people looked at him with pity or with the reverence his status demanded. Emma had none of these pretensions. The girl, with a clear and childish voice, said, "I want to help your legs become special." Michael blinked, surprised by the child's audacity. My mom said that what's missing in one place, life makes up for in another. She then took another step closer, her eyes shining with an unusual seriousness for her age. Michael remained silent. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. The girl's words, so simple and direct, hit him in a way that no phrase from a doctor or therapist had managed to. And for the first time, he also didn't want to push anyone away. He didn't feel the need to raise his barriers of coldness. The presence of that child, so pure and unpretentious, seemed to have opened a small crack in his hardened heart. Emma's presence in the mansion, initially an accident, became a constant. Sarah, initially apprehensive about her daughter's invasion of privacy, and Michael's reaction, soon realized that the girl had somehow found a crack in the businessman's armor. Michael, who previously became irritated with any interruption, now seemed to tolerate and even expect the little one's visits. Emma, with her inexhaustible energy and boundless curiosity, didn't care about the heavy silence of the house or Michael's wheelchair. For her, he was just a big adult who needed help, and she a little helper in training. She imitated her mother's movements, applying clumsy but full of pure intention touches to Michael's legs. Sometimes she brought her colorful drawings, showing him fantastic worlds of fairies and dragons, and told stories with the seriousness of an experienced storyteller. Michael, to his own surprise, began to have fun. Emma's funny faces as she tried to massage his feet, the way she struggled to reach his legs, or the innocent comments she made about the world around her, drew genuine laughs from him, something that hadn't happened in a long time. They were short laughs at first, almost a reflex, but gradually became looser, more genuine. The mansion, once a tomb of silence, began to be filled with the sound of a child's laughter, and occasionally with the hoarse laughter of a man who was rediscovering joy. Sarah observed it all with a mixture of relief and admiration. She saw the transformation in Michael, not just in his mood, but also in his body. The initial tingling became more frequent, and the sensations, though still sporadic, were more intense. She continued with her compresses and massages, now with Emma's enthusiastic help, who felt like an important part of the process. On a sunny afternoon, while Emma was telling a story about a prince who had lost his legs and recovered them with the help of a fairy, Michael felt something stronger. It wasn't just a tingling but a spasm, an involuntary and sudden movement in his right leg. His eyes widened. It was real. A warmth, a real warmth, traveled through his leg, like a river that had been dry for a long time and suddenly received water. "Sarah!" he exclaimed, his voice choked with emotion. "I felt it! I felt my leg!" Sarah quickly knelt beside him, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Emma, not fully understanding the magnitude of what had happened, applauded, thinking it was part of the prince's story. That moment was a watershed. Hope, once a flickering flame, now burned more strongly. Michael began to dedicate himself with renewed intensity to the exercises, driven by the belief that recovery was possible. He spent hours in physical therapy, his muscles sore, his mind exhausted, but the image of Emma's smile and Sarah's encouraging voice propelled him. Sarah, in turn, researched, read, and adapted the exercises, always with the intuition that Michael's body needed a different kind of stimulus. She helped him sit, balance, try to move his toes, celebrating each tiny victory as if it were a great triumph. His fiancée, Victoria, noticed the change in the house's atmosphere, but didn't understand it. She saw Michael more animated, but attributed it to a superficial improvement without delving into the cause. The constant presence of Emma and Sarah, however, began to bother her. For Victoria, the caregiver and her daughter were just employees, and the intimacy that was forming between them and Michael was an affront to her position. She felt she was losing control, that her place beside Michael was being threatened by those two simple but powerful figures. The turnaround wouldn't be long in coming, hanging in the air like a storm cloud, ready to descend on the fragile peace that had been established in the mansion. The clear morning, which promised to be another day of progress and hope, became the stage for an explosion that had been contained for a long time. Michael had spent the last week intensifying his exercises, driven by the sensation of warmth and by more frequent spasms. With Sarah's help, he had begun trying to stand, supported by parallel bars installed in the mansion's spacious physical therapy room. These were painful attempts, requiring Herculean effort, But each second that his feet touched the ground, even with the body's weight still supported, was a victory. That afternoon, Emma, as usual, was present. She watched with wide eyes as her mother guided Michael, adjusting his posture, encouraging him with soft words. The girl, feeling part of the team, held one of Michael's arms with her small hands, offering symbolic, but full of affection, support. Michael, sweaty and panting, felt his body tremble, but the determination in his gaze was unwavering. He was focused, concentrating on each muscle fiber, trying to evoke a response. It was at that exact moment, while Michael was straining to lift his body, supported by the bars and the help of Sarah and Emma, that Victoria entered the room. She was coming from outside, impeccably dressed, with a designer bag hanging from her shoulder and an expression of boredom on her perfect face. Her eyes scanned the scene. Michael, sweaty and with his face contorted by effort, Sarah kneeling beside him with her hands firm on his legs, and Emma, the intrusive child, holding her fiancé's arm. Victoria's smile faded, and a wave of fury distorted her features. "What is this circus?" she shouted, her voice echoing through the room with a cutting acidity. "Michael, what are you doing? You look like a disjointed puppet, and you, Sarah, what do you think you're doing? This isn't a circus, for God's sake, what a ridiculous scene!" Sarah shrank slightly, but kept her hands firm on Michael, not letting him go. Emma, scared by Victoria's tone of voice, squeezed Michael's arm, her eyes filling with tears. Victoria, however, didn't hold back. "And this child? What is she doing here, messing everything up? I hired you to take care of Michael, not to turn the house into a playground. This is undignified. You two, get out of here right now. I don't want to see this farce anymore." The humiliation was palpable. Sarah felt her face burn, but before she could respond, Emma, with surprising courage for her age, released Michael's arm and faced Victoria. "My mom is helping Uncle Michael to walk. He's going to get better. You don't know anything." The childish but firm voice cut through the air, leaving Victoria momentarily speechless. Michael, who until then had remained silent, with his face pale from effort and growing anger, felt something ignite within him. Victoria's fury, Sarah's humiliation, Emma's innocence and courage, everything mixed in a whirlwind of emotions. He looked at Sarah, who was looking at him with a mixture of concern and resignation. He looked at Emma, who, despite her tears, kept her chin up in defense of her mother. And then something broke inside him. With a roar of effort and a searing pain that ran through his entire body, Michael released the parallel bars. Sarah tried to support him, but he gently pushed her away. His muscles trembled violently, sweat dripped down his face, but he remained standing. For a few seconds, just a few seconds, Michael Sullivan stood without support in the middle of the room. It was an act of pure will, a challenge to gravity and Victoria's disbelief. The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. Victoria, with her mouth half open, seemed to have seen a ghost. Sarah had her hands over her mouth, her eyes brimming with emotion and astonishment. Emma let out a small cry of joy, forgetting the scolding. Michael, still standing, though trembling and with a contorted face, fixed his eyes on Victoria. "Get out of my house, Victoria," he said, his voice hoarse but firm, loaded with an authority she hadn't heard in a long time. "Get out now, and forever." Victoria blinked, trying to process the words. "Michael, what are you saying? It's absurd. I'm your fiancé. I was just concerned about you, about this situation." She tried to approach with a forced smile, her voice honeyed. "You're tired. It's the emotion. Let's talk calmly." But Michael didn't move. His eyes, once full of despair, now shone with a frightening clarity. "There's nothing to talk about. My choice is made. I want by my side someone who believed in me when even I didn't believe in myself anymore. Someone who helped me stand up, not who pulled me down." He made a gesture with his hand, a gesture of final dismissal. "Goodbye, Victoria." With a last look of shock and anger, Victoria turned and left the room, her heels echoing on the cold marble, taking with her the trail of her toxic presence. Michael, feeling his legs weakening, fell back into the wheelchair, exhausted, but with a feeling of lightness he hadn't felt in a long time. He had rid himself of a weight, and the choice, though painful, seemed the most right he had ever made in his life. But fate, as always, had even more surprises in store for him. The silence that followed Victoria's thunderous departure was no longer the oppressive and empty silence of before. It was a different silence, loaded with an unexpected lightness, as if an immense weight had been removed from Michael's shoulders. He was exhausted, his legs still trembling from the monumental effort of having stood up, but a peace he hadn't felt in a long time began to settle in his chest. Sarah, with tear-filled eyes, knelt beside Michael's wheelchair, and Emma, still euphoric, hugged his legs tightly. "You did it, Uncle Michael! You did it!" Emma exclaimed, her voice full of admiration. Michael looked at Sarah, a weak but genuine smile appearing on his lips. "I couldn't have done it without you two," he whispered, his voice still hoarse. "Never." Sarah just nodded, tears flowing freely down her face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief and a deep joy. She had witnessed Michael's struggle, his pain, his frustration, and now his redemption. That moment with Michael standing, defying all expectations, had been proof that faith and care could move mountains. The rest of the afternoon was filled with a comfortable quietness. Michael was taken back to his room, and Sarah, with Emma's help, assisted him in composing himself. There weren't many words, just looks of understanding and gestures of affection. Michael felt an immense gratitude for those two women, who in such distinct ways had rescued hope in his life. Victoria's absence didn't leave a vacuum, but rather space for something more true and meaningful to flourish. At night, after Emma was already sleeping in one of the guest rooms, Michael asked Sarah to take him to the mansion's terrace. The sky was clear, speckled with bright stars, and the night breeze brought a welcome freshness. He wanted that moment to be special, a milestone for the new chapter that was opening in his life. When they reached the terrace, with the vastness of the night sky stretching above them, Michael asked Sarah to come closer. He looked her in the eyes, and there was no longer the coldness of before, nor the arrogance of the powerful businessman. There was only vulnerability, gratitude, and a love that was beginning to blossom. "Sarah," he began, his voice a little choked with emotion, "I know all this happened very quickly, and I know it might be crazy, but you and Emma brought me back to life. You made me believe again, not just in my body, but in something much greater." He paused, breathing deeply, preparing for what was to come. With a visible and painful effort, Michael knelt before her, supporting himself on one knee, his body trembling, but the determination in his eyes unwavering. Sarah let out a small cry of surprise and tried to help him up, but he stopped her with a gesture. "No, Sarah, please, let me do this." He took her hand, looking at the starry sky as witness, and then back at her. "I lost a lot, but I gained something I never imagined I could have. A family. I want you and Emma to be my family. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building something real, something worthwhile. Will you be my wife, and be the mother that Emma deserves to have by my side?" Sarah was speechless. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of pure emotion and a love she didn't know she could feel again. She looked at the man before her, the once arrogant businessman, now kneeling, humble and sincere. She saw the truth in his eyes, the promise of a future that seemed impossible just a few hours ago. "Yes, Michael," she whispered, her voice choked. "Yes, I accept. With all my heart." Michael let out a sigh of relief, and a radiant smile illuminated his face. He pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the warmth of her body against his, a sensation of belonging that he had never experienced. At that exact moment, Emma, who had awakened to the noise and come to peek, appeared at the terrace door, her eyes sleepy. She saw the scene, the embrace, and the emotion in the air. "What's happening?" she asked, her childish voice. Michael and Sarah separated, smiling at the girl. Michael, still kneeling, extended his arms to Emma. "Emma, your mother and I are going to get married. We're going to be a real family." Emma's eyes widened and a huge smile opened on her face. She ran into Michael's arms, who hugged her tightly. "Now we're three," she shouted, her voice echoing across the terrace under the starry sky, a declaration of a new beginning, of a family that had been born from adversity and the purest love. Months later, the mansion that was once a symbol of isolation and pain pulsed with a new life. Michael, with unwavering determination and the constant help of Sarah and Emma, had made remarkable progress in his recovery. That day on the terrace had been the catalyst for a new phase of his life, a phase where happiness and love were the true pillars. The days that followed that starry night on the mansion's terrace were filled with an energy that Michael hadn't felt in years. Victoria's departure had left a void that was quickly filled by the lightness and authenticity that Sarah and Emma brought to his life. The mansion, once a mausoleum of luxury and loneliness, began to breathe. Emma's laughter echoed through the corridors, the aromas from the kitchen, once rare, now announced meals prepared with care by Sarah, and her own presence brought a calmness that Michael had never known he needed. Michael's recovery gained a new momentum. That second, when he remained standing, driven by anger and the need to defend Sarah and Emma, had been proof that his body, in fact, still had life. Now, with Sarah at his side, not just as a caregiver, but as his fiancée and partner, physical therapy ceased to be a torture and became a shared life project. Sarah, with her sharp intuition and unwavering faith, continued to apply her simple but effective techniques. Compresses, massages, stretches, all done with a dedication that went beyond professionalism. It was love. Emma, the little fairy of that tale, continued to be the greatest encourager. She sat beside Michael during the exercises, singing made-up songs, telling stories of overcoming or simply holding his hand, transmitting a pure and contagious energy. "Come on, Uncle Michael." "A little bit more," she would exclaim, and Michael, even with his muscles trembling in pain, would find strength to continue. Progress was slow, painful, but constant. The spasms became stronger, the sensations more clear. He could move his toes, a feat that once seemed impossible. Then came the ability to stand for longer periods, supported by the bars. And finally, the first time he took a step with the aid of a walker, a small miracle that made Sarah and Emma cry with joy. The mansion transformed into a true home. The cold and imposing furniture was softened with personal touches. Emma's drawings adorned the walls of Michael's office, and the living room, once untouched, now had toys scattered about and children's books. Meals became sacred moments, with the three seated at the table, sharing the day, dreams, and small victories. Michael, who used to eat in silence, now participated in the conversations, laughing at Emma's antics and listening attentively to Sarah's stories about her day. He discovered that happiness wasn't in closed deals or grandiose parties, but in the simplicity of those shared moments. The relationship between Michael and Sarah deepened with each day. They talked about everything, about the past, about the future, about their fears and their hopes. Michael opened up like never before, revealing his vulnerabilities, his regrets, the pain he had carried in silence. Sarah, in turn, shared her own story, the difficulties of being a single mother, the struggle to survive, but always with a perspective of gratitude and resilience. They became each other's safe harbor, the rock on which they could lean. Mutual admiration transformed into a deep and unconditional love, a love that wasn't based on appearances or possessions, but on the essence of who they were. Plans for the wedding began discreetly, with Sarah insisting on something simple, without the fanfare that Michael used to give to his events. He, to everyone's surprise, agreed. He didn't want a party for society, but an intimate celebration of the love he had found. The small church near Sarah's old house was chosen, a simple place but loaded with meaning. As the day approached, the mansion buzzed with a joyful expectation. Sarah, with the help of a local seamstress, was preparing her dress, a classic and elegant model. Emma, excited, helped choose the flowers and imagined her role as special maid of honor. Michael, for his part, dedicated himself even more to physical therapy, determined to walk down the church aisle with minimal help. Each step he took with the walker was a rehearsal for that moment. On the eve of the wedding, the mansion was in a different silence, a silence of anticipation. Michael was in his room, looking at the walker beside the bed. He could feel the strength in his legs, the connection that had been restored. It wasn't the same strength as before the accident, but it was a new strength, built with resilience, love, and the faith of two women who had taught him to believe again. He closed his eyes, reliving the past months, the darkness that had been dissipated by the light that Sarah and Emma had brought. Tomorrow would be the day when he would not only marry the woman who had saved him, but also seal the fate of a family that had been born from adversity, proving that sometimes the greatest loss can lead to the greatest gain. The wedding day dawned with a shy but promising sun filtering through the mansion's curtains. Michael woke up early. Anxiety and emotion a knot in his throat. It wasn't the anxiety of a big business deal or a social event, but the pure and sincere expectation of a man who was about to seal a new chapter of his life. He sat on the bed, feeling the muscles in his legs which, although not fully recovered, responded with a strength that once seemed impossible. Sarah was already up, moving around the house with a calmness that contrasted with Michael's internal agitation. She was preparing a light breakfast, with the help of Emma, who was radiant in her little white dress with a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. The mansion, once so cold, now radiated a familiar warmth, a smell of fresh coffee and the sweetness of flowers. Michael observed Sarah from afar, his heart overflowing with gratitude. She was simple but beautiful, with her hair tied in an elegant bun and a delicate veil. Her eyes, always so expressive, shone with a mixture of nervousness and joy. He thought about how life had transformed. From a man trapped in his own bitterness, he was about to marry the woman who had taught him the true meaning of strength and love. The small church, a modest building of ancient stone, was decorated with simplicity and good taste. White flowers and green foliage adorned the altar, and the few benches were occupied by some close friends of Sarah and some older employees of the mansion who had witnessed Michael's transformation. There wasn't the pomp and ostentation that marked Michael's events in the past, but there was an atmosphere of genuine happiness and hope. Michael, with his heart beating strongly, was taken to the church entrance. He held the walker firmly, feeling the weight of the moment. Each step was a challenge, a battle against pain and the memory of immobility. But the image of Sarah waiting for him at the altar and Emma's encouraging smile at his side propelled him. With a visible but determined effort, he began to cross the nave. The soft sound of the wedding march filled the air, and each step, as slow as it was a victory. The eyes of those present were fixed on him, some with tears, others with admiration. He was no longer the powerful and unreachable businessman, but a vulnerable man who had found strength in weakness and love in adversity. There at the altar, Sarah waited for him, dressed in white, a radiant smile on her face. Beside her, Emma, with her bouquet of wildflowers, smiled with a contagious innocence. When Michael finally reached the altar, he let go of the walker, leaning slightly on the altar, his eyes fixed on Sarah's. It was a moment of pure emotion, the culmination of an unexpected journey. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. The priest's words echoed through the small space, speaking of love, of overcoming, of faith. Michael and Sarah exchanged sincere vows, promises not only of love but of partnership, mutual support, of building a life together. The rings, simple and elegant, were placed on their fingers, sealing the union. At the end of the ceremony, with the soft applause of those present, Michael leaned over and whispered in his now wife Sarah's ear, "Now I understand. Sometimes they tear off our petals, but whoever truly cares helps us heal the roots." He hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth of her body, the softness of the dress, the beat of her heart against his. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, smiled. She knew exactly what he meant. The petals were the superficialities, the luxury, the life he thought was important. The roots were the essence, the soul, the ability to love and be loved. And she, with her simplicity and her care, had helped to heal Michael's wounded roots. Emma, who was watching the scene with a radiant smile, ran to hug her parents, her little arms embracing both. "Now we're a real family," she exclaimed, her voice full of joy, and the sound of her laughter filled the small church. And with that, the man who thought he had lost everything finally discovered what it truly meant to have everything. It wasn't the mansions, the jets, or the businesses. It was the love of a simple woman, the joy of a child, and the ability to rise again, not alone, but with the help of those who truly cared. The life of Michael Sullivan, once a book of torn pages, now began a new chapter, written with ink of hope, resilience, and a love that had blossomed from the ashes of a tragedy. The future was uncertain as always, but now he had a family by his side, and that was all he needed. Life in the Sullivan mansion, after the wedding, took on a rhythm that Michael had never imagined possible. Away from the spotlight of society and the relentless demands of the business world, he found a peace that money and power could never buy. Sarah and Emma, with their warm and uncomplicated presence, transformed the coldness of marble and crystal into a vibrant and welcoming home. The first days as newlyweds were like a honeymoon within the walls of their own home. Michael, still recovering, couldn't travel, but Sarah's company was the paradise he needed. They spent hours talking in the garden, under the soft sun, or reading in the library with Emma playing nearby. Sarah, now the lady of the house, didn't change her essence. She continued to care for Michael with the same dedication, but now with the intimacy and affection of a wife. She supervised the house with a quiet efficiency, organizing the routine so that everything worked in harmony, without the chaos that Victoria had left behind. Emma flourished in that new environment. The girl, previously accustomed to a simpler life and her mother's worries, now had a father who adored her and a house full of spaces to explore. She helped Sarah in the kitchen, planted flowers in the garden, and continued to be Michael's biggest encourager in his physical therapy. Her laughter filled the rooms, and her innocent questions about the world made Michael see life with new eyes. He found himself smiling at trivial things, something he had forgotten how to do. Michael's physical recovery, although still a daily challenge, continued to progress. The walker became his constant companion, and he could take firmer steps and for longer periods. Sarah, with her infinite patience and her intuitive knowledge of the body, adapted the exercises, introducing new techniques and always celebrating each small victory. Pain was still present, but it was a different pain, a pain of overcoming, not of despair. He felt the muscles strengthening, the neural connection re-establishing, and the hope of walking again without assistance burned stronger than ever. The news of Michael's marriage to his caregiver, a simple woman and single mother, caused considerable buzz in the social circles he used to frequent. Victoria, humiliated and furious, spread rumors and slander, trying to tarnish Sarah's reputation and Michael's image. However, to her surprise, most people who really knew Michael or who had witnessed his transformation ignored the gossip. Some of his old friends and business colleagues, who had distanced themselves during his period of seclusion, began to approach again, curious to see the new Michael and the woman who had worked such a miracle. Michael, however, didn't care about others' opinions. His priority was his new family. He spent the mornings working in his office, reorganizing his business, but now with a more balanced perspective. The afternoons were dedicated to physical therapy and mainly to spending time with Sarah and Emma. He discovered that true wealth wasn't in bank figures, but in shared moments, in the complicity of looks, in the warmth of an embrace. One night, while Emma slept deeply, Michael and Sarah were sitting on the porch, observing the stars. The silence was filled only by the sound of crickets and the soft breeze. "I never imagined that life could be like this," Michael confessed, holding Sarah's hand. "I had everything, or thought I did, but it was all so empty. You and Emma, you filled a void I didn't even know existed." Sarah smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Life has its own paths, Michael. Sometimes we need to lose what we think is important to find what truly matters." He held her tight in his arms, feeling the soft scent of her hair. That moment of peace and fullness was proof that life, even after the greatest turnarounds, always offers the chance for a new beginning. However, fate, with its intricate plot, still held surprises for the new Sullivan family, challenges that would test the strength of their bonds and the resilience of their love. The calm that had settled was beautiful, but the horizon, though serene, was never completely free of clouds. The serenity that had settled in the Sullivan mansion was a balm for Michael's soul, but he knew that life, with its inherent unpredictability, rarely remains in a state of perfect calm for long. And indeed, the first cloud on the horizon emerged from where he least expected: Sarah's past. One afternoon, while Michael was working in his office and Emma was playing in the garden, Sarah received a call. Her face, usually so serene, paled, and her voice, previously calm, became hesitant and full of a concern that Michael had never seen. He, noticing the change in her countenance, interrupted his work and observed her. Yes, it's me," Sarah said on the phone, her voice almost a whisper. "But how did you get my number? I don't know what you're talking about." She paused, listening attentively, and then her expression contracted in a mixture of shock and disbelief. "No, that's not possible. He's alive?" Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. Who could it be? Sarah's concern was palpable, and he knew something serious was happening. When she finally hung up the phone, her eyes were teary, and her hands were trembling. "Sarah, what happened?" Michael asked, approaching her with the walker. "Who was that? What happened?" Sarah raised her eyes to him, an expression of despair on her face. It was his mother, Michael, the mother of Emma's father. She said that he's alive, that he didn't die in the accident." The words fell upon Michael like a bomb. Emma's father. Alive. Sarah had told him that Emma's father had died in a car accident a few years ago, shortly after the girl's birth. It was a story of loss and overcoming that had contributed to Michael's admiration for her. Now that story seemed to crumble. "But how is that possible?" Michael asked, trying to process the information. "You told me he had died, that Emma had no father." Sarah sat heavily in an armchair, her hands covering her face. I thought he had died, Michael. The police informed us at the time. There was a serious accident, the car was found charred, and they said there were no survivors. I believed it, I swore I believed it." She looked up, her eyes teary. He was a complicated man, Michael. We had a difficult relationship. He had problems, but I loved him. And Emma loved him, even without really knowing him. Michael felt a pang of jealousy, but concern for Sarah and the complexity of the situation dominated him. "And now? What did she say? Where is he?" "She said he's in a hospital in a town in the countryside, that he was rescued but was in a coma all this time with serious injuries and amnesia. Only now is he recovering and beginning to remember some things. And Emma's name was one of the first he said." The news was shocking. The man whom Sarah and Emma had mourned and given up for dead was alive, and now probably would come to claim his place in their lives. Michael felt a chill down his spine. His new family, his newfound peace, everything seemed threatened by a ghost from the past. "And what are you going to do?" Michael asked, his voice tense. Sarah looked at him, her eyes full of uncertainty. "I don't know, Michael. I need to go see him. I need to understand what happened, and I need to think about Emma. She has the right to know." Michael nodded, although his heart was tight. He knew Sarah was right. Emma deserved the truth, and Sarah needed to confront her past. But the idea of losing Sarah, of seeing his new family disintegrate, was unbearable. He had found happiness, true happiness, and now it was at risk. In the days that followed, the mansion, once full of laughter, was taken over by a silent tension. Sarah was distant, immersed in her thoughts, preparing for the trip. Emma felt the change in the air, but didn't understand the gravity of the situation. Michael, for his part, tried to stay strong, but uncertainty corroded his soul. He had fought to rise again, to build a new life, and now Sarah's past threatened to tear everything down. The turnaround was bitter, and the future once again seemed uncertain. Sarah's trip to the countryside was torture for Michael. Each hour that passed without news from her was an eternity of uncertainty. He tried to concentrate on his business, but his mind constantly wandered to Sarah, to the man who had returned from limbo, and to Emma's future. The mansion, without Sarah's vibrant presence and Emma's contagious joy, who had gone with her mother, seemed to have returned to its former coldness, a grim reminder of the days of solitude. Emma, in turn, was confused. Her mother had explained that they were going to visit a very old friend who was sick, but the tension in the air was palpable. The girl, with her childish sensitivity, perceived the change in Sarah's mood and the absence of Michael's easy smile. In the country hospital, Sarah found a pale and fragile man, a shadow of what she remembered. Jason, Emma's father, was indeed alive. He recognized her with difficulty, his eyes still clouded by amnesia and years in a coma. Jason's mother, an elderly and tired lady, explained the details. The miraculous rescue, the late identification, the long recovery, and now the slow return of memories. Emma's name had been one of the first to emerge in his fragmented mind. The reunion was bittersweet for Sarah. She felt a pang of pity for the man she once loved, but also a latent anger for the pain he had caused and for the turnaround his resurrection brought to her new life. Jason, with a weak voice, expressed a genuine desire to meet his daughter, to try to rebuild the lost time. He didn't remember the problems of the past, only a vague memory of love for Sarah and the expectation of being a father. Sarah, divided between compassion and protection of her new family, allowed Emma to visit him. The interaction between father and daughter was delicate. Emma, initially shy, soon loosened up, showing her drawings and telling stories. Jason, with tears in his eyes, tried to connect with that girl who was living proof of his past. Sarah observed, her heart tight. She knew Emma had the right to know her biological father, but feared the consequences of this rapprochement. 2 days later, Sarah and Emma returned to the mansion. Michael was waiting for them at the door, the anxiety evident on his face. He hugged Emma tightly, relieved to have her back, and then his eyes met Sarah's. He didn't need to ask. Her expression already said it all. They sat in the living room, Emma playing in a corner, oblivious to the gravity of the conversation. Sarah told Michael all the details: Jason's fragility, his amnesia, his desire to reconnect with Emma. "He wants to be part of her life, Michael," Sarah said, her voice choked. "He's not the same man as before, he's weak, but he's her father." Michael listened in silence, his jaw tense. He felt the jealousy, the insecurity, the fear of losing everything he had achieved, but he also saw the pain and complexity in Sarah's eyes. He loved her and knew she would do what was best for Emma. "And what are you going to do?" Michael finally asked, his voice hoarse. Sarah looked at Emma, who was laughing while stacking blocks. "I can't take away Emma's right to have a father, but I also can't let him disturb the peace we've built. He needs time to recover, to understand what happened, and we need time to understand how to deal with this." She turned to Michael, her eyes full of a serene determination. "I told him he can have contact with Emma, but under my conditions. Supervised visits for now. And that he needs to prove he's changed, that he's stable, and that the priority is always Emma's well-being." Michael sighed, a mixture of relief and apprehension. It wasn't the end of the problem, but it was a plan. He knew the path would be long and full of challenges, but Sarah's decision, thoughtful and focused on Emma's good, reaffirmed his love and admiration for her. "And us?" Michael asked, his voice softer. "What does this mean for us?" Sarah approached him, taking his hand. "It means we're a family, Michael, and families face challenges together. I chose you. I chose this life with you and Emma. Nothing will change that." He pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling her warmth and security. The threat from the past had materialized, but hadn't broken the bonds that united them. The family he had found, built on resilience and love, was strong enough to face any storm. Jason's presence would be a new element in their lives, a challenge to be overcome. But Michael knew that with Sarah by his side, they would find a way. Michael's journey of recovery wasn't just physical. It was also the journey of his soul, learning to deal with the complexities of life and love, and to protect the happiness he had fought so hard to achieve. The months that followed were a delicate ballet of emotions and adjustments in the Sullivan mansion. Jason's presence, although distant and controlled by Sarah, hung like a shadow, testing the solidity of the new family. The supervised visits began, initially at the hospital, then in a public park, always with Sarah present, acting as a protective shield for Emma, and a mediator between the past and the present. Emma, with her innocence and capacity for adaptation, faced the pale and silent figure of Jason with a childish curiosity. She didn't see him as a father, but as an Uncle Jason who told stories in a low voice and observed her with a melancholy in his eyes. Jason, in turn, tried to connect, bringing small gifts and trying to revive memories that he himself could barely access. His physical and mental fragility was visible, and Sarah, although cautious, felt a pang of compassion. Michael observed everything from afar, his heart divided. At each visit he felt a tightness in his chest, an irrational fear that Jason's presence could destabilize the happiness he had found. He saw the way Emma approached, the way Sarah dealt with the situation with an admirable grace and strength. At first, jealousy corroded him, but with time he began to see Jason not as a threat, but as a victim of a cruel fate, a man who was trying to rise from his own ruins. Tension, however, was inevitable. There were moments when Jason, in his confusion, tried to impose himself, or when his mother called Sarah with demands, wanting more time with her granddaughter and with her son. Sarah, with the firmness of a lioness, established the limits, always prioritizing Emma's well-being and the stability of her new family. Michael, although not directly participating in the conversations, was her unwavering support, a safe harbor for her. Despite the emotional turbulence, Michael's physical recovery continued to surprise. The initial stress caused by the news of Jason's return had paradoxically lit a new flame of determination in Michael. He didn't just want to walk, he wanted to be strong enough to protect his family, to be the pillar that Sarah and Emma needed. He intensified the physical therapy, pushing his limits, enduring the pain with a remarkable resilience. One day, while Sarah was on one of Emma's visits with Jason, Michael was in the mansion's gym, trying a new balance exercise. He was sweaty, panting, and the muscles in his legs were trembling. Suddenly, he lost his balance and fell, hitting his arm. The pain was acute, but the frustration was even greater. He was tired of his own limitation, tired of depending on the walker, tired of feeling vulnerable. When Sarah returned, she found Michael sitting on the floor, his face contorted by pain and anger. She knelt beside him, her eyes full of concern. "What happened, Michael?" she asked, assessing the situation. "I fell," he replied, his voice choked. "I'm tired of this, Sarah. Tired of being a burden, of not being able to do things on my own. I need to be stronger. For you. For Emma." Sarah touched his face, her eyes conveying a deep calm. "You're not a burden, Michael. You're the strongest person I know, and you're already more than enough for us. Your strength isn't just in your legs, but in your heart, in your capacity to love and to fight." She helped him get up, with patience and care. "Let's continue, one day at a time. We're in this together." Sarah's words were a balm for Michael's soul. He realized that his strength didn't need to be the same as before the accident. His strength now came from a different place, from his ability to love and to allow himself to be loved. He understood that, even with the scars of the past and the challenges of the present, the family he had built with Sarah and Emma was his true fortress. Jason continued to recover slowly, but his presence in Emma's life stabilized in a secondary role as a biological father who visited her occasionally, without the intention or the capacity to destructure the life she had. The Sullivan family, in its new configuration, had learned to navigate the turbulent waters of the past, emerging stronger and more united. Michael, alongside Sarah and Emma, wasn't just a man who had recovered from an accident. He was a man who had rebuilt himself, finding true happiness in a love that healed all wounds. Life, with its complexities, had taught him that true wealth was in the resilience of the spirit and in the unbreakable strength of family bonds. Time, with its relentless fluidity, continued to weave the days in the Sullivan mansion, transforming wounds into scars and uncertainties into convictions. Jason's presence in Emma's life stabilized into a routine of sporadic visits, always supervised and with clear limits imposed by Sarah. He was recovering slowly, but amnesia largely persisted, and his capacity to be an active and present father was limited. Emma treated him with affection, but it was Michael whom she called Dad, who hugged her before sleep and who taught her to ride a bicycle in the vast garden of the mansion. The relationship between Michael and Sarah, forged in the flames of adversity, became increasingly deeper. They were a safe harbor for each other, an unwavering fortress against life's storms. Sarah continued to be Michael's anchor, his silent strength, and he in turn was the pillar that supported her, the man who loved her unconditionally and who had welcomed Emma as his own daughter. Michael's recovery, which seemed a miracle to many, was the result of his iron determination and Sarah's tireless care. The spasms, once uncontrollable, were now signs of life, of nerves reconnecting. The exercises became more intense, and the steps with the walker firmer. Michael's goal was clear: to walk without assistance on Emma's birthday, which was approaching. It was a gift he wanted to give her and himself. On the morning of Emma's 7th birthday, the mansion was in celebration. Colorful balloons floated through the hall, and the smell of chocolate cake hung in the air. Close friends and some employees of the mansion were present, celebrating the girl who had brought so much light to that house. Emma, with a full skirt dress and a smile that illuminated the environment, ran from one side to the other, infecting everyone with her joy. At the moment of singing Happy Birthday, everyone gathered around the table. Michael was in his wheelchair next to Sarah, watching his daughter with a sparkle in his eyes. The cake, decorated with fairy tale characters, awaited the candles. After the song ended and Emma blew out the candles with a strong breath. Michael made a sign to Sarah. With her help, he stood up from the wheelchair. Silence took over the hall. Michael breathed deeply, feeling the floor beneath his feet, the strength he had reconquered. He looked at Emma, who was watching him with wide eyes. "Emma," he began, his voice a little choked with emotion, "your dad has a special gift for you today." With a determined smile, Michael released Sarah's hand. The eyes of all present widened. He took a step, then another, and another. Slow, a bit hesitant, but firm. He wasn't using the walker, nor was he leaning on anyone. Michael Sullivan, the man who had been given as paraplegic, was walking. Emma let out a cry of joy and ran to him, hugging his legs. Michael bent down, kneeling with a controlled effort, and hugged her tightly, feeling hot tears run down his face. Sarah, with her hands over her mouth, cried silently, her eyes overflowing with pride and love. "You did it, Dad!" Emma exclaimed, her small hand squeezing his neck. Michael kissed her on the forehead. "Yes, daughter, we did it." That moment, witnessed by all, was living proof that resilience, love, and faith could work miracles. Michael's journey hadn't just been the recovery of his body, but the healing of his soul. He had lost everything, but in its place, found something infinitely more valuable: a family. The years passed, and the Sullivan mansion continued to be a refuge of love and happiness. Michael, although he never fully recovered the mobility of before the accident, walked with autonomy, living a full and active life. He returned to work, but with a new perspective, dedicating part of his time to social projects and to helping people with disabilities. Sarah, his eternal companion, continued to be the light of his life, his partner in everything. And Emma grew up, an intelligent and kind young woman, with the strength of her mother and the determination of her father, a living testimony of the love that had transformed lives. The story of Michael Sullivan became a legend, not for his fortune or power, but for his ability to rise from the ashes, to find true happiness where he least expected. He learned that life, no matter how much it knocks us down, always offers the chance for a new beginning, and that the roots of love and family are the only ones that truly matter. The years that followed Emma's birthday, where Michael had taken his first steps without assistance, were a silent testimony to the resilience and love that had taken root in the Sullivan mansion. The house, once a monument to Michael's solitude, became a vibrant home, filled with the life that Sarah and Emma had brought. Michael, although he never fully recovered the agility of before the accident, walked with an autonomy that defied medical prognoses, a constant reminder of his personal victory. His recovery wasn't just physical, it was a complete transformation of perspective. The Michael Sullivan who emerged from the ashes was no longer the relentless and distant businessman. He still managed his business with intelligence, but his priority had drastically changed. Much of his time and fortune was now dedicated to the Strong Roots Foundation, which he and Sarah created. The foundation offered support to people with physical disabilities, providing physical therapy, equipment, and more importantly, hope and psychological support. Michael, with his own story of overcoming, was the face and soul of the foundation, inspiring hundreds of people to believe in the possibility of a new life. Sarah was the heart of the foundation, working tirelessly alongside Michael. Her experience as a caregiver and her natural empathy made her the ideal person to guide the projects and offer comfort. She found an even greater purpose in her life, seeing up close the positive impact they were causing. At home, she continued to be the anchor, the calm and loving presence that kept the family united. Her days were filled with managing the house, supporting Michael, and educating Emma, who was growing under her watchful eyes. Emma, now a vibrant and full-of-life teenager, was the personification of happiness and resilience. She had inherited Michael's intelligence and Sarah's kindness and strength. Her childhood, marked by the presence of a distant biological father and the construction of a new family, had made her a compassionate and mature young woman for her age. She excelled in her studies and dedicated her free time as a volunteer in her parents' foundation, listening to patients' stories with an empathy that touched everyone. She was living proof that love and care could transform any adversity into a springboard for growth. Jason, the biological father, had passed away a few years later, due to complications from his fragile health, and his departure was received with a mixture of sadness and relief, a definitive closure of a complex chapter. Victoria, for her part, completely disappeared from their lives, a distant memory of a past that Michael had overcome. The nights in the mansion were often filled with conversations in the garden, under the starry sky, or with the reading of books in the library, with Michael and Sarah sharing their reflections on the day, the challenges, and the small joys. The mansion, once silent and opulent, was now a home, a sanctuary of memories, and a love that had flourished in the most unlikely circumstances. On one of those quiet nights, sitting on the porch, Michael held Sarah's hand. "Remember when I said that sometimes they tear off our petals, but whoever truly cares helps us heal the roots?" he asked, a soft smile on his lips. Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand. "I remember. And you proved it, Michael. You taught me that true beauty is in the strength of the roots, in what truly sustains us." He looked at the horizon, where the city lights twinkled in the distance. "I lost a lot, Sarah, but I gained everything. A family, a purpose. And you?" She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the peace that emanated from him. The life of Michael Sullivan, which seemed to have ended in tragedy, had been rewritten with ink of hope, love, and overcoming. He was no longer just the magnate, but the man who had found redemption and happiness in the simplicity of love, and in the unbreakable strength of a family built on the most solid foundation of all, the resilience of the human spirit. And so the story of Michael, Sarah, and Emma continued, a legacy that, no matter how deep the wounds, there is always a chance to flourish again, stronger and more beautiful than before. The years unfolded like the petals of a rare flower in the Sullivans' life, each season bringing new colors and textures to the tapestry of their existence. The mansion, once a refuge of pain, transformed into an epicenter of life, laughter, and a love that deepened with each day. Michael, with his hair sprinkled with silver and a slower but still firm walk, was the personification of resilience. His strong roots foundation flourished, expanding beyond the city's borders, becoming a beacon of hope for thousands of people who, like him, sought to rise again. He dedicated himself to the foundation with the same passion he once dedicated to his financial empires, but now with a much higher purpose. Sarah, the eternal light of his life, continued to be the driving force behind Michael and the foundation. Her quiet wisdom and unwavering compassion were the pillars that sustained everything. She supervised the foundation's programs, offering support and guidance, and at home, she was the guardian of the peace and love that united them. Her eyes, which Michael loved so much, still shone with the same intensity of the day they met, a reflection of a pure soul and a heart overflowing with affection. Emma, the little fairy who had rewritten Michael's destiny, grew up and became a remarkable woman. She followed in her parents' footsteps but traced her own path. With a degree in psychology and an innate passion for helping others, she became a central figure in the Strong Roots Foundation. Her empathy and her ability to connect with people in their most vulnerable moments made her an exceptional therapist and counselor. She was living proof of the legacy of love and overcoming that Michael and Sarah had built, a testimony to the beauty that can emerge from adversity. On a late summer afternoon, 20 years after that simple wedding in the small church, Michael and Sarah were sitting on the mansion's porch, watching the sunset tint the sky with shades of orange and purple. Emma, now an adult and independent woman, had just left for a foundation conference in another state. "She became an incredible woman, didn't she?" Sarah commented, nestling closer to Michael. Michael smiled, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "She is the best part of both of us, Sarah. Everything we went through, everything we learned, it's in her." He squeezed her hand, feeling the familiarity and comfort of that touch. "I never thought life could be so full. I had everything the world could offer, but I had nothing. You gave me everything, Sarah. You gave me a family, a purpose, a life." Sarah turned to him, her eyes teary. "You also gave me a lot, Michael. You gave me a love I never imagined would exist, a life I never dared to dream. And you taught me that a person's true value isn't in what they have, but in what they're capable of giving and loving." The silence that followed was filled with the melody of crickets and the soft breeze that swayed the leaves of the trees. It was a silence of gratitude, of memories, and of a love that had withstood time and trials. The mansion, with its centenary walls, had witnessed the transformation of a man, the formation of a family, and the blossoming of a love that proved to be stronger than any tragedy. Michael, who was once trapped in his own body and in his own bitterness, now lived a life of freedom and fullness. He had understood that the greatest losses can, paradoxically, open the way for the greatest gains, and that true happiness isn't found in the absence of problems, but in the ability to face them with love, faith, and alongside those who help us heal the roots. The story of Michael Sullivan wasn't just that of a man who rose again, but of a soul that found its true home in the heart of a family. The decades rolled by. The Sullivan mansion witnessed not just the passage of time, but the consolidation of a legacy. Michael and Sarah aged with the grace and wisdom that only a life full of challenges and overcomings can grant. Michael's hair was now completely white, and his walk, although still firm for his age, carried the weight of a well-lived life. Sarah, with her expression wrinkles that told stories of smiles and tears, radiated a serenity that was the essence of her soul. The Strong Roots Foundation had become an empire of hope. Under Emma's leadership, who had assumed the presidency with the blessing of her parents, the foundation expanded its operations throughout the country, building rehabilitation centers, offering scholarships, and promoting the inclusion of people with disabilities in all sectors of society. Emma, with her innovative vision and her compassionate heart, ensured that the spirit of resilience and love that her parents had planted continued to flourish and touch countless lives. Michael and Sarah, now in a calmer phase of their lives, enjoyed the fruits of their work and the love of their family. They spent their days in the garden, reading, talking, or simply watching life happen around them. The mansion was frequently visited by Emma, who brought with her the news of the foundation and the joy of her own achievements. She had built a happy life, guided by the values her parents had taught her, and was the greatest proof of the love that united them. On a special day, Michael and Sarah's 50th wedding anniversary, the mansion was the scene of an intimate but deeply meaningful celebration. There wasn't the pomp of the past, just the warm presence of Emma, some older friends, and the employees who had become part of the family. The dinner was simple, but the environment was loaded with emotion and gratitude. After the meal, Michael, with Emma's help, stood up and, leaning slightly on the cane that now accompanied him, walked to Sarah. He looked her in the eyes, which still shone with the same intensity as when he met her. "My Sarah," he began, his voice choked with emotion, "50 years ago I was a broken man, lost in his own darkness. You, with your light, your strength, and your unconditional love, rescued me. You taught me to walk again, not just with my legs, but with my soul. You gave me the family I never knew I needed, and the purpose I never imagined I would find." Sarah smiled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "And you, my Michael, gave me a love that transcended all expectations. You taught me that life is a garden, and that even after the most violent storms, the strongest roots always find a way to flourish." Emma, observing her parents, felt her heart overflow with love and admiration. That was her story, the legacy they had built with each step, each challenge overcome, each act of love. Michael and Sarah embraced, an embrace that contained half a century of memories, of shared joys and sorrows, of a union that had proved to be unbreakable. The silence that followed was the melody of a well-lived life, of a love that had healed all wounds, and of a family that had become a beacon of hope for the world. The story of Michael Sullivan, the magnate who lost everything and found true wealth in the simplicity of love and the strength of family, became a timeless tale. A reminder that, no matter how deep the adversities, the human capacity to love, to rise again, and to find a higher purpose is the true essence of life. And so, in the mansion that was once a symbol of isolation, the light of love continued to shine, illuminating the path for future generations, an eternal testimony that the strongest roots are those that heal and flourish together. The years that followed Michael and Sarah's 50th wedding anniversary were a serene epilogue to an extraordinary life. The mansion, with its walls loaded with memories, became a sanctuary of peace, where time seemed to slow down, allowing each moment to be savored in its fullness. Michael and Sarah, now in their 80s, lived their days with a dignified quietness, their bonds stronger than ever, forged by decades of love, overcoming, and companionship. The Strong Roots Foundation, flourished under Emma's leadership. She had become a respected figure in the philanthropic scene, expanding the foundation's reach beyond national borders, inspiring other similar initiatives around the world. Her parents' vision, that true strength resides in the ability to rise again and to help others do the same, was the beacon that guided each step of Emma. She frequently visited the mansion, bringing with her the energy of the outside world and the stories of transformed lives, which filled Michael and Sarah's hearts with immense pride. In their quiet afternoons, Michael and Sarah often sat in the garden, hand in hand, observing the flowers that Sarah loved so much. Conversations were less frequent, but the silences were filled with a deep understanding, a communication that transcended words. They mentally reviewed the tapestry of their lives, the accident, the darkness, Sarah's arrival, Emma's light, the marriage, the foundation, the challenges with Jason, and the construction of a happiness that seemed impossible. Michael, who had learned to walk again, now moved with the help of a cane and sometimes a wheelchair for longer distances, but his mind remained as sharp as ever. He still followed the Foundation's reports, offering wise advice to Emma, and his eyes shone when seeing the impact of his legacy. Sarah, always by his side, was his memory, his comfort, his eternal love. One afternoon, as the sun was setting, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold, Michael and Sarah were sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket. The breeze brought the perfume of the garden flowers. "Remember, Sarah," Michael whispered, his voice weak but full of affection. "I used to think that life was about accumulating. Money, power, prestige." Sarah squeezed his hand. "And what did you learn, my love?" Michael smiled, a serene smile that illuminated his wrinkled face. "I learned that life is about giving. Giving love, giving hope, giving oneself. And that true wealth isn't in what one has, but in what one shares. And the greatest wealth I gained was you and Emma. You gave me a life I would never have dreamed of." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the slow and steady beat of his heart. Words were no longer necessary. Their love was a melody that resonated through time, a story that would be told and retold, a testimony to the human capacity to rise again, to heal and to love, no matter how deep the wounds. And so in the quietness of that late afternoon, with the sun bidding farewell on the horizon, Michael and Sarah remained, united in a love that had flourished from the ashes of a tragedy and become a beacon of hope for all who witnessed it. The Sullivan Mansion, which was once a symbol of isolation and pain, became the home of a legacy of love, resilience, and the eternal proof that the strongest roots are those that heal and flourish together forever. The twilight of Michael and Sarah's life arrived with the same softness with which the sun sets on the horizon, tinting the sky with colors that evoke peace and fullness. The Sullivan Mansion, with its walls that had absorbed so many stories, became the stage for the last chapters of a saga of love and overcoming. Michael and Sarah, inseparable as always, continued to enjoy each other's company, each touch, each look, loaded with decades of affection and mutual understanding. Emma's visits became more frequent, and she spent long hours beside her parents, listening to their stories, sharing hers, and simply enjoying their presence. The Strong Roots Foundation prospered under her leadership, a living testimony to the purpose that Michael and Sarah had found in their lives. Emma was the guardian of this legacy, ensuring that the flame of hope and inclusion continued to burn for future generations. Michael and Sarah's days were now filled with the quietness of home, the reading of books, the appreciation of music, and the contemplation of the garden that Sarah had cultivated with so much care. Michael's physical pain was a constant presence, but he faced it with the same dignity that characterized him. Sarah, with her unwavering dedication, continued to be his caregiver, his confidant, and his eternal love. Her gestures were slow but full of tenderness, and the connection between them was so deep that words became almost unnecessary. On an autumn morning, with the fresh air and the soft sun entering through the bedroom window, Michael and Sarah were lying side by side. Michael, with a weaker breath, turned to Sarah. His blue eyes, although a bit clouded by time, still reflected the love he felt for her. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice almost inaudible, "I love you. More than words can say." Sarah squeezed his hand, silent tears streaming down her face. "I love you too, my Michael, more than anything." He smiled, a smile that brought the peace of a well-lived life. You were my light, my salvation, my life. With a last soft sigh, Michael closed his eyes. His hand remained in Sarah's, an unbreakable link. Silence filled the room, not a silence of emptiness, but a silence of fullness, of a love that had transcended existence itself. Sarah remained there for a long time, holding her husband's hand, feeling the residual warmth, the memories of an extraordinary journey flooding her soul. Michael's departure was deeply felt, but not with despair. It was the natural conclusion of a life that had been rescued and lived with a purpose. Emma, upon arriving, found her mother serene, wrapped in the aura of a love that death couldn't break. The funeral was a celebration of Michael's life, of his legacy, of his transformation. People from all walks of life, whose lives he had touched, came to pay their respects. Sarah continued to live in the mansion, surrounded by Emma's love and by memories of Michael. She spent her days in the garden, caring for the flowers, feeling his presence in every corner of the house they had transformed into a home. Her life, although now without the physical presence of her beloved, continued to be a testimony to the power of love, resilience, and the ability to find happiness, even after the greatest adversities. The story of Michael and Sarah Sullivan, a tale of redemption and unconditional love, would echo forever in the walls of the mansion and in the hearts of all those who were touched by their extraordinary journey. The Sullivan mansion, now a reliquary of memories, continued to be Sarah's home. After Michael's departure, she found solace in routine, in the beauty of the garden they so loved, and in Emma's constant presence. The pain of loss was deep, but it wasn't an empty mourning. It was the longing for a love that had filled every fiber of her being, a love that death couldn't erase. Emma, with her strength and compassion, became Sarah's pillar. The visits were daily, filled with conversations about the foundation, about memories of Michael, and about plans for the future. The Strong Roots Foundation was the living legacy of her parents, and Emma dedicated herself to it with the same passion and resilience that Michael and Sarah had demonstrated. She knew that by continuing the work, she kept their spirit alive. Sarah, despite her advanced age and physical fragility, maintained her lucid mind and her heart overflowing with love. She spent hours in the garden, feeling the sun on her face, remembering Michael's first steps without the walker, Emma's laughter as a child, the dinners on the porch under the stars. Each corner of the mansion, each flower petal, each ray of sun that entered through the windows told a part of their story. On a sunny spring afternoon, Sarah was sitting in her favorite armchair on the porch, observing the garden bloom. The air was perfumed, and the birdsong filled the environment. She held in her hands an old photograph, Michael, young and smiling, beside a small Emma, with eyes shining with joy. The image was a vivid reminder of everything they had built together, of the life they had rescued from the ashes. Her eyes, now teary, fixed on the horizon, where the sun began to incline. She felt a soft breeze touch her face like a kiss. A serene smile drew itself on her lips. There was no fear, just a deep sensation of peace and gratitude. "Michael," she whispered, her last breath mixing with the wind. The hand that held the photograph relaxed, and the image of her family gently fell onto her lap. The smile remained on her face, an expression of contentment and of a love that had found its way back home. Sarah had departed not to darkness, but to the reunion with the man who had taught her to love and to live fully, leaving behind a legacy of hope and the unquestionable proof that true love is eternal. Emma, upon arriving at the mansion, found her mother at peace with the same serene smile that Michael had taken with him. The pain of loss was immense, but the certainty that her parents were together again, somewhere beyond the veil, brought a deep consolation. The Sullivan mansion, now empty of its founders, would remain as a monument to the story of Michael and Sarah, a tale of resilience, redemption, and a love that flourished where least expected, proving that, even in the greatest adversities, life always offers the chance for a new beginning.